I just want to add something also to the earlier debate we were having about the shape of the economy and what kinds of choices we're going to make in this moment. You know, when the Enron scandal happened, remember that Enron? That was a few years ago. Clearly a precursor to the moment that we're in now. I remember among my friends all this outrage that there wasn't more outrage, that, you know, this huge Ken Lay running off with, you know, the pensions, essentially, of his loyal employees didn't trigger a kind of American reaction to the notion that greed doesn't exist. You know, we have an economy built on the idea that there's no such thing as greed. As much as you want to accumulate, as much as you're able to accumulate, that's all good. And what effect that accumulation has on anybody else is nobody's business, and certainly not the government's business. So I think that this moment calls for us to educate everybody, from the administration to the average person who has to put pressure on the administration and on Congress, to be able to understand that there are certain assumptions built into our economy that now we have to shift. So one of those assumptions is the one I mentioned: there's no such thing as greed. Another assumption is that the racial and gendered hierarchies we see, the segregation where certain people have this job and other people have this job, that's some kind of natural thing. That comes from God or something, or just from the earth, and that we can't reshape that. I do a lot of work, and I've written a book about the restaurant industry, in which you see, again, this very obvious hierarchy if you choose to look. The Restaurant Opportunities Center of New York, which I work closely with, just did a matched pairs testing study where they sent in applicants, pairs of applicants, one white, one of color, and an interesting alliance building outcome there is that, of course, the white people got more opportunity than the people of color, but the women, whether they were of color or not, were quite frequently told, we don't hire women in this restaurant. In high-end restaurants, how often do you see a woman server, a woman sommelier, a woman bartender? Hardly ever. So you could build an alliance to reform the racial and gender hierarchy in the restaurant industry. They claim they're the biggest private sector industry in the country. They have growing numbers of jobs, not shrinking, even in this economy. It's a sector of the economy that recovers quickest from recessions. So it would make sense, even though it's the service industry, for us to invest a lot in the restaurant industry, and in part invest in making those jobs, those service jobs, into good jobs, just as Heather mentioned, we made industrial jobs, manufacturing jobs, into good jobs a century ago. But for us to take on that kind of project means that we have to have organizing and education and media and scholarship at a massive level. We have to take that to scale. And it's no longer going to be enough for us to do our little work in our little way and hope that, you know, one person, the right person, heard it. In fact, in order to get to the right people, we have to play a numbers game, and that means that we have to pay, I think, a great deal more attention to the media and communications aspects of our work, of your scholarship. How are you going to get that out in front of people outside of the academy? That's a key question that I hope all of you will, really work with while you're here.
Can I just make one comment on the question that the person had asked like 20 minutes ago on childcare, because it just sort of dawned on me that we kind of forgotten that for a second. One thing I just wanted to note as I was listening to the question, I was like, yeah, childcare, yeah, it's expensive, and just sort of thought I should just throw out there that, one of the challenges that, of course, the administration is dealing with right now is that they're trying to pick and choose their battles in terms of things that are big ticket items. I would guess that probably all of us on the panel would agree that healthcare is probably the number one, one of the number one issues. Maybe, no, yeah, maybe, I don't know. Yeah, okay, somewhere. And I think that once we get that big elephant out of the way, then some of these other things that also cost money will start percolating up to the top. But they have been very clear, at least in my world, of kind of being like, yeah, that's all great, and we'll talk to you once it's done. I mean, they never say that, of course, directly, but that's certainly the feeling that I'm usually left with is like, yeah, once they pass this healthcare bill, then they'll talk to us. So just a little bit of hope to just hold on.
So we should be preparing for that moment?
Exactly.
Is that what you're
we
thinking?
should be ready.
Definitely, yeah.
We should be ready, and also just give them a little, be a little patient, but
I just want to ask, do you think that, the country as a whole is ready for like this, health care that's sort of a little bit of nationalized medicine and maybe even some of these other benefit programs? Or is really the country, working people in general, are we ready to say, embrace and say, this is what we need? Does anybody?
Well, let's turn these questions to the audience for a minute. I have some more questions. Oh, we have someone over there, and maybe some others. But really, what is the country ready for? Are we ready to sort of upend the occupational hierarchy and our notions, our assumptions about that? So yes.
Cultural shift.
Yes.
My name is Susan Kirsch.
Please introduce yourself.
Oh, yes. My name is Susan Kirsch. I'm a retired psychiatric social worker in New York City and a teacher and trainer of social work students. And now I'm part of the Granny Peace Brigade, the Raging Grannies, and working for single-payer healthcare now. I think while Obama certainly has some promise, I think there's a lot of mistakes, that are starting to be made. I think the individual stimulus money that they sent out, and a little bit to each person, could have done much better if it had been used. As much as it helped people a little, maybe, to buy a television set or pay off, a little bit of bills, could have been much more used cumulatively for daycare, for all the big issues that you were talking about. And I think it was a political, it made the Congress people feel better that people in the districts are getting something, but cumulatively it didn't really make any difference. It sort of went down the drain. And the other thing is, as long as we spend money on the war of Afghanistan and the war in Iraq, we're not going to have money for here. And I think Obama's position as somebody who's a long-term peace activist is rather appalling. That kind of money that could be used here and should be used here. And so I just want to say that I think he's better on the right track, but and also this business of now the banks, the TARP program, the banks that are giving it back won't have to be regulated. I mean, that was in a couple of month period. You're going to regulate them, and now all of a sudden the ones that are giving it back are not going to have any rules about executive pay. And so there's a lot of AC/DC in some of the things he's doing that I don't think are very helpful for long-term policy or long-term economic help for people who really need it.
Thank you very much. So I think you're really asking the question about priorities, and we can come back to that.